Our protagonist has just returned, and in the middle of contemplating his pathetic life, a system screen suddenly appears, announcing that he has awakened. Our protagonist is left in utter disbelief as the system reveals that he has received the summoner trait. In this world, there are many traits and classes, ranging from fighter types to mages, and now he has become a summoner. Summoners are able to call forth spirits, golems, and other creatures as their familiars. However, to his shock, our protagonist's first summon is a human. The chill guy greets him warmly, and even acts strangely, making him wonder if the class or system is broken. What he doesn't know is that the man before him is no ordinary person. While other awakened individuals fall between D to A rank, our protagonist's summons are literally S rank and above. So yeah, our protagonist is built different. He's literally overpowered from the start. However, just a moment ago, we begin the story with Bong Joo-hyuk, who was just an ordinary nobody. Despite working 3 part-time jobs, he was unable to afford anything other than ramen because he had a huge debt. However, at that same moment, our protagonist began to awaken. Joo-hyuk explains that becoming an awakened is a life-changing opportunity. People even consider it a stroke of luck, rarer than winning the lottery. However, our protagonist notes that he needs to be alive in order to enjoy that wealth. There are countless dangers and ways a person, despite being an awakened, can lose his or her life. He makes this clear because he has lived his life constantly avoiding dangerous situations. To put it simply, he has lived as a wimp, a loser, and a coward. It's safe to say that being an awakened doesn't feel real to him. He even wonders if he is hallucinating. Because of this, he calls up the status window. The status window immediately shows his information, his name, his affiliation with the Black Tower in Korea, and, as we already know, he is a summoner with a designated random summon. The system window is enough confirmation that he is truly an awakened. As a result, he decides to test his trait. The moment he dramatically uses his designated random summon skill, nothing really happens, making him realize his mistake. Joo-hyuk explains that the skills of an awakener don't work outside the tower. An awakener's skills and traits are only usable inside the tower. Aside from accessing the status window, the moment a player exits the tower, they automatically become a regular human being. However, to Joo-hyuk's shock, his random summon actually activates. Our protagonist is stunned because this is the first time a skill has worked outside the tower. Even more shocking is that his first ever random summon is a man. Seeing our protagonist's blank reaction, the newcomer greets him warmly. Meanwhile, our protagonist is still struggling to understand how and why a man was summoned as his first summon when he isn't even inside the tower. Speaking of the man, he politely asks our protagonist if he could eat some ramen. Our protagonist watches his summon eat as he criticizes the taste of the food. Now our protagonist is still wondering how he managed to summon a man out of nowhere. The status window pops up again. It explains that our protagonist can summon both humans and demi-humans. In addition, they are divided into 4 classes, beginning from rare up to legendary special super rare. Furthermore, his summons are forced to abide by 3 principles. First, they must protect him above anything else. Second, they must obey him absolutely. In cases where both principles conflict, the first one takes priority. Our protagonist notes that these principles are useful, but they still don't explain the guy he just summoned. As if to answer him, the system pops up the man's bio. John Cossack, also known as the Mad Assassin of the Cruel Assassin Guild. He is a super rare summon. Obviously, the guy is human, with a 6-hour manifestation time. Our protagonist feels a headache coming on as more information about John Cossack floods into his mind. In that instant, our protagonist feels his consciousness being pulled into a different dimension, more precisely, into John Cossack's past memories. Our protagonist watches as John easily deals with several men. After that, John takes his time tying ribbons on the severed heads, making our protagonist realize why he is called the Mad Assassin. Anyway, the system explains from John's memories that he met his end because of a failed assassination attempt. To put it simply, his target was the Empire's strongest swordsman. He got sliced in half before he could even sense the swordmaster's attack. So when our protagonist suddenly senses John behind him asking why he was spacing out, he immediately panics and creates distance. Our protagonist realizes he has just summoned a monster, but thankfully, he is reassured by the summon principles. Unsurprisingly, John Cossack follows all of our protagonist's instructions, even cleaning his place without complaining. Seeing our protagonist's reaction, John reminds him that it is his duty as a summon to follow all his orders. Our protagonist tests this by telling John to bark. At first, our protagonist becomes anxious, wondering if he has gone too far. To his surprise, John actually obeys, despite his previously prideful personality. Now, Juhyok is completely reassured that nothing will happen to him. Just then, frantic, heavy knocking is heard at the door. Our protagonist almost forgot that today is the day he is supposed to pay the interest on his debt. He explains how he ended up in debt. He needed a huge sum of money, and since the bank couldn't lend to him, he had no choice but to go to loan sharks. This was because of his father's injury, which required surgery, and he also needed to pay for his little brother's tuition. So yes, he desperately needed the money. However, all this time, he has only barely been covering the interest and hasn't touched the principal. Still, he doesn't regret his choices. Hearing the loan sharks growing restless outside, our protagonist calls John Cusack. Misunderstanding the situation, John prepares himself and asks for the kill order, but our protagonist shakes his head. Instead, he pushes John to hide and insists that he must not make a sound, no matter what he hears. The moment our protagonist opens the door, the loan shark immediately reminds him about the interest. Our protagonist replies that he simply forgot. Offering advice, the loan shark suggests he could sell one of his kidneys and all his problems would disappear. The moment one of the loan shark's companions mentions our protagonist's little brother, he becomes furious. Seeing this, the boss questions his sudden expression and asks if he plans to fight. Scratching his head, our protagonist immediately denies it. With that, the loan sharks leave, though not without warning him to watch himself if he doesn't want to end up dead. At the same time, John Cusack comes out. Our protagonist comments that he did a great job staying quiet, which was expected since he was instructed to do so. Because of today's events, our protagonist begins to weigh his options, wondering if he should enter the tower. But unfortunately, a coward like him would rather play it safe than risk entering the tower. Interrupting his thoughts, John Cusack asks if there is anything he can do. Our protagonist replies that he can do whatever he wants. John cheerfully responds that he wants to watch TV. Our protagonist is inwardly surprised by his attitude but agrees. Just like that, our protagonist goes to sleep while John continues watching TV. He thinks that even though John is a summon, he isn't entirely bad. Having someone around isn't so bad. Anyway, he decides to sleep because he has a long day ahead. The next scene takes us to the following morning. Our protagonist doesn't see John, so he naturally assumes the summon has been unsummoned after the manifestation time expired. He is about to get ready for work when he is interrupted by breaking morning news. The reporter talks about what they suspect to be an attack on an illegal loan shark agency. The moment the name of the agency is mentioned, our protagonist freezes, because yes, it's the same loan shark from the previous day. Even more shocking, the heads of all the members were cut off and tied with ribbons. Of course, this can only be the handiwork of one person. Our protagonist shouts, concluding he just summoned a terrifying murderer. Later at work, our protagonist goes over the news. The entire time he reads the article, he thinks he is completely screwed. Just then, a customer approaches him with an item. However, our protagonist is so terrified that he keeps imagining the severed heads of the loan sharks. Seeing his reaction, the female customer asks if he is okay, and he quickly apologizes. After his day job, our protagonist decides to take some time off from all his part-time jobs. Apparently, he can't stop seeing the heads of the loan sharks and ultimately concludes that it was because of him. Anyway, later that day at his house, our protagonist browses the system and checks John Cusack's information once more. He concludes that the guy really is a mad assassin, and he feels grateful that he is the summoner, meaning the guy can't harm him. Nonetheless, our protagonist summons John. However, something strange happens. Before summoning, the system reminds him to leave a satisfaction rating. Our protagonist had almost forgotten about this. Because of the traumatic experience John put him through, our protagonist initially considers giving him a 1-star review. But he can't bring himself to do it because he isn't heartless. The system notifies him that he has left a 3-star rating. Our protagonist explains that his mom used to be a coordinator for a water purifier rental company. In other words, he knows from experience how heartbreaking a poor rating can be. Anyway, John Cusack is summoned and greets our protagonist with his usual enthusiasm. Our protagonist watches John's innocent and cheerful expression as he thanks him for the rating and promises to work even harder. After a brief moment of silence, our protagonist decides to ask if John really murdered the loan sharks. Of course, John confirms it, noting that he took care of them last night right before being unsummoned. Our protagonist's heart sinks the moment John casually admits the truth. Still, he forces himself to calm down. When he asks John how he even discovered their location, John reveals that he placed a mark on them using a tracking skill. Our protagonist recognizes the name of the skill, but he still asks why John went so far as killing them. When John labels them as threats and explains that he dealt with them in advance, our protagonist is left stunned, since he never requested that. Hearing this, John reminds him of the 3 principles of the summons. Although a summon must follow all orders, when the summoner's life is in danger, they are free to take action. He also explains that he cannot kill his summoner. When our protagonist makes a throat-slashing gesture, John clarifies that he obviously can't do that because of the first rule. Our protagonist still expresses confusion, so John points out that the 3rd rule can be interpreted in many ways. From his perspective, those loan sharks needed to be dealt with. Our protagonist almost swears upon hearing that, but the pathetic wimp ends up apologizing instead. John insists it's fine, noting that he has heard worse before. Meanwhile, our protagonist begins to realize how dangerous this situation is. To illustrate, he imagines walking down the street with John and accidentally bumping into someone. If that person curses and threatens to kill him, it would count as a threat. But from John's perspective, that person would deserve a fancy decorative bow on their head. Seeing his master's anxious expression, John suddenly kneels and apologizes. So our protagonist makes him promise not to kill anyone, but John can't fully promise that. However, after much persistence, he agrees to exercise better judgment. Our protagonist finally breathes a sigh of relief and is about to undo the summon, but John stops him and asks if he doesn't plan on climbing the tower. Our protagonist is momentarily stunned. While others consider awakening a life-changing opportunity, he can't bring himself to climb the tower because he is afraid of dying. Because of John's earlier question, our protagonist asks if there were other people who had summoned him before. John nods in response. He adds that those summoners were strong and brave. Our protagonist notes that he doesn't have that kind of courage. He believes other awakened risk their lives to save the world, while he is just a pathetic loser. But to his shock, John corrects him, saying he is the best summoner ever. Still excited, John asks if he knows the greatest virtue of a summoner. Without waiting for a response, he says it is safety first. Basically, John insists that our protagonist should prioritize survival above all else. There's no need for him to fight. He can leave the dirty work to his summon. Because summoners who risk their lives tend to die early, John wants him to live quietly and enjoy a long life. The next scene takes us to the following day. Our protagonist reflects on John Cusack's words and still hasn't made up his mind about climbing the tower. At least he is grateful that because of John's actions, he no longer needs to worry about the loan sharks. He concludes that, moving forward, he will simply find a job and live his life quietly. But as usual, bad news arrives at times like this. Predictably, our protagonist receives a call from his dad, informing him that he needs to move to a better hospital. In addition, his mom has just been fired. Sensing his reaction, his dad reassures him that everything is fine and that he simply wanted to check on him. Our protagonist appreciates this and says he will come home sometime before hanging up. As a result, our protagonist prepares himself to enter the tower. As usual, he tells himself that he is only going in to check things out. If it's dangerous, he will leave immediately. Thinking about summoning, our protagonist wonders if he really needs to enter the tower with John. He considers his next summon, maybe, if he gets lucky, he could obtain a legendary type. Unfortunately for him, the system informs him that the random summon is unavailable. In addition, he learns that the cooldown for random summon is 1 month. In the end, he summons John, who thanks him for leaving a 5-star rating. Our protagonist avoids his gaze. After all, he had just tried to summon someone else. Anyway, when he informs John about his plan to climb the tower, John first admits he is brave before immediately backtracking and insisting that he shouldn't be brave. Regardless of whether our protagonist plans to just take a look and leave, John offers to handle everything. He assures him that it will be a smooth run and that he won't even need to lift a finger. And just like that, our protagonist calls the system and initiates entry to Tower Floor 1. The system immediately notifies them of the entry. And just like that, both of them are sucked into the space. While being pulled through space, our protagonist keeps screaming the entire time. Eventually, both he and John are successfully transported to the first floor of the tower. Our protagonist notes inwardly that the first floor is a complete wasteland. However, he suddenly feels nauseous. As he throws up, John pats him gently on the back, assuring him that he will get used to it. Anyway, the two of them leave the safe zone and venture into the wasteland. The moment our protagonist fully steps into the wasteland, he feels his physical attributes increase, as the system also notes that the traits of his summoning class are being activated. Our protagonist is amazed, noting that this is how players feel even at level 1, he already feels a bit stronger. Regardless, the system gives him his mission. He is tasked with eliminating 5 tough-skinned fat maggots within 2 hours. He will fail the mission if he dies or abandons it. As if on cue, they soon spot a couple of maggots. Our protagonist explains that, from the novice tutorial, the first floor is meant to test a player's skill. Even though the maggots deal little to no damage, their skin is extremely tough, making them difficult to kill. Some experienced players even say it can take up to 30 minutes just to kill one. However, guess who suddenly grows a spine after becoming a player? Our protagonist marches forward, insisting he will take one down himself. Meanwhile, John Cusack tries to stop him, reminding him that he doesn't need to do anything. However, our protagonist simply ignores him. Only after approaching a maggot does he realize he doesn't have a weapon, and he quickly asks John to lend him one. Our protagonist doesn't even realize he is about to be attacked by the maggot. The moment he notices, all his built-up confidence vanishes, and he immediately asks John for help. John Cusack responds with a playful thumbs up, praising him for the wise decision. The guy moves so fast it looks like he teleported, and boom, he kills the maggot with a single strike. But he isn't done yet. After launching multiple maggots into the air, he prepares his daggers. Next, he throws all the daggers at them. Each dagger hits perfectly, and John turns his back before activating a skill called Blade Burst. And just like that, he farms them effortlessly, leaving nothing but destruction behind. Our protagonist can't believe John wiped out all the maggots in the blink of an eye. Several notifications pop up. After completing the mission, our protagonist levels up and gains 100 grams of Mana Stone. In addition, he receives an S++ rank on the first floor. As a reward for the S++ rank, he is given a Platinum badge. Our protagonist is on Cloud 9. Everything feels incredibly easy, and he realizes he can get rich really fast. However, what he doesn't know is that he has just shaken all of Korea. The system makes a global announcement. In other words, at this very moment, every player in Korea learns that a novice has cleared the first floor while shattering all records. Meanwhile, our protagonist chooses to exit the tower, even though he now has access to the second floor. He feels uneasy about clearing the first floor in just 5 minutes. Interrupting his thoughts, John compliments him on a job well done. Our protagonist casually replies that he didn't do anything, but that was the whole point. Anyway, he shifts his attention to his rewards. The first is the Mana Stone. From his expression, we can tell this is the first time he has seen one in person. Mana Stones are an indispensable resource. Our protagonist notes that their price has dropped ever since the tower first appeared. The cost of 100 grams of Mana Stone is about 50,000 won. Despite this being common knowledge, our protagonist has no idea what the Platinum badge does. Regardless, he is thrilled. After all, he just made 50,000 won in 5 minutes. Because of this, our protagonist orders takeout. This is the first time he is eating something good aside from ramen. Meanwhile, John takes a sniff of the food. Seeing his reaction, our protagonist assures him that he didn't order anything spicy, since he knows John doesn't like it. Because of this, John thanks him for the food and prepares to dig in. However, when our protagonist asks why he is speaking so formally and with a distinct accent, John explains that it's because he was close to his previous summoner. Our protagonist understands. It's like being influenced by a close friend. John offers to change the way he speaks if it bothers him, but our protagonist shakes his head, saying he enjoys it. The two of them share a good laugh. Our protagonist concludes that John isn't entirely bad. Now, our protagonist gains confidence, thinking he can easily climb the tower. The next scene takes us to the following morning. Our protagonist has figured out his daily routine. His time now revolves around his 2 part-time jobs, since he quit one to make time for entering the tower. Later, he summons John once again, who greets him with his usual enthusiasm, making our protagonist wonder if it was really necessary. Anyway, John is glad that our protagonist has been giving him good satisfaction ratings, which makes our protagonist question if it is really important. John nods, pointing out that better ratings bring better benefits. For instance, his manifestation time could increase, along with his rank and other advantages. Regardless, this time our protagonist enters the second floor of the tower with John. This time, the system tasks him with eliminating 10 nimble fat maggots within 2 hours, with the same failure conditions as before. Our protagonist observes the surroundings and thinks this floor might be trickier because the maggots are more agile. When John senses his worry, he reassures him that nothing will happen. In a flash, John decides to take care of the maggots within 3 minutes. With that, he dives into battle. Meanwhile, our protagonist decides he will order chicken if things go well. Of course, John gets excited and thanks him in advance. As expected, John deals with all the maggots instantly. At the same time, the system notifies our protagonist that he has cleared the stage, gained 200 grams of mana stone, and leveled up. He also receives the same additional rewards as before. Excited, our protagonist moves on to the 3rd floor, this time landing perfectly. The 3rd floor is cleared just as easily, allowing him to level up again and gain 300 grams of mana stone. As usual, he receives the same additional rewards, just like that. Our protagonist continues advancing and eventually reaches the 5th floor. At that moment, the system informs him that he has received 5 S++ badges. Because of this, he is rewarded with a special perk. Of course, our protagonist has absolutely no idea what that means. So the system explains. A perk is an enhancement to an awakened trait. The effect of this particular perk allows our protagonist to summon 2 summons at the same time. In addition, our protagonist is currently at level 6 and doesn't have any available skills except the general skill that only allows him to enter the tower. Seeing this, our protagonist concludes that platinum badges and S++ rewards are the best. Now he can't wait for the cooldown of his random summon. In addition, he thinks he needs to keep climbing the tower to unlock more rewards. The next scene takes us to the Korean Awakening Management Department. We enter inside, and the entire office is silent. Meanwhile, a man sits with a serious expression, contemplating the best time to post their reports. Interrupting his thoughts, his female coworker asks if he was thinking about the global announcement. That question annoys him, especially since he has warned her to stop prying into people's thoughts. Anyway, the man is Jeon Gwangli, the team leader, while the lady is Lee Mina, the manager of the Awakening Management Department. Regardless, Gwangli asks if the new announcement has been posted. Mina confirms it, adding that the 6th floor was cleared with an S++ rank. Gwangli becomes nervous upon hearing this. He concludes this must be the work of a single person, and that player must be extremely strong. He wonders how long the player can maintain his S++ clear streak. Finally, the director speaks. Park Kyung-soo tells them that, as they already know, the highest rank in Korea is an A, and now someone has just shattered what they never imagined was even possible. He also mentions player migration, noting how some countries tend to kidnap players and take them to their own country. In summary, Director Park Kyung-soo insists they must find the US++ player immediately. The next scene skips abruptly to 2 days later. Inside our protagonist's place, John Kosak is busy helping with the dishes as our protagonist informs him they are heading to the 8th floor. Meanwhile, our protagonist's thoughts reveal that from the 1st to the 10th floor are basically the beginner floors. In other words, things should proceed smoothly. The next scene takes us into the tower. This time, our protagonist is tasked by the system to deal with 10 red thorn frog warriors. As usual, John Kosak easily deals with them. Our protagonist clears the floor and gains 800 grams of mana stone. In addition, he receives a healing potion, and as expected, he clears the floor with S++ and receives a platinum badge. Exiting the tower, John Kosak thanks our protagonist for his hard work, even though he literally just stood there and did nothing the entire time. John points out that this is the entire point of being a summoner, but warns that things might get tricky after the 10th floor. Regardless, our protagonist is excited and decides to reward John Kosak for his hard work. To his shock, John Kosak immediately refuses the money, insisting he would rather watch TV instead, adding that he can't leave our protagonist's side. Our protagonist realizes this has to do with the principles of the summon. Because of this, he decides to order some chicken instead. John Kosak happily agrees and even places the order, reminding them not to bring anything spicy. Anyways, our protagonist thinks of his other rewards and decides to give John the healing potion. As for the mana stones, he thinks it's about time to start cashing out by selling them. We skip to the 10th day. It's time for our protagonist to climb the 10th floor. Initially, he only wanted to just test it and leave the tower. But thanks to John, climbing the tower has been nothing but a breeze. At this point, our protagonist has literally forgotten that John is the same psycho who killed the loan sharks. Still, he summons John, and thanks to a continued 5-star rating, John's manifestation time has increased by an hour. Our protagonist is thrilled, and John, as usual, insists his master should leave everything to him. The next scene takes us to the 10th floor. Moments after entering the tower, the system adjusts our protagonist's status to match the current floor. Our protagonist feels the effect, noting his strength increasing, and feels mana filling his lower abdomen, or rather, his dantian. At this point, he feels like a warhorse ready to charge. As a result, John Cusack is stunned when our protagonist offers to help this time. The guy tries to persuade him otherwise, but our protagonist still insists. However, John rejects the idea of our protagonist endangering himself. While our protagonist is in the process of reassuring him, he suddenly feels something looming over him. In an instant, he breaks into a cold sweat. Before them is a giant praying mantis. Still in shock, our protagonist wonders how players even manage to clear this floor. His pride takes a hit, and he decides to let John handle it. The mantis launches an attack straight at John. However, John easily evades and uses the praying mantis's arm as leverage to ascend. With precise precision, John slices the mantis into countless pieces. Our protagonist clears the floor, levels up, and receives 1 kilogram of mana stone. In addition, he clears with an S++ and receives a platinum badge. Also, our protagonist has accumulated enough badges to unlock another perk. Our protagonist is visibly excited and wonders what perk he will get this time. The system informs him that he can copy 1 skill from his summon. While explaining this, it shows all of John Cusack's skills. John Cusack overhears our protagonist wondering what skill he should choose, so he immediately suggests Shadow Step. As for the reason, the skill can help our protagonist escape if anything happens to John Cusack. As expected, safety first. Still, our protagonist doesn't like the idea of running away. Even so, he has no choice but to learn the skill. Our protagonist tries to convince himself that the skill is just for footwork. After all, good footwork is essential in combat. When he wonders if it could work outside the tower, our protagonist notes that the skill actually works like his summon, but it's very inconsistent. The next day, the 11th day of climbing the tower, our protagonist calls someone. The people on the other side happen to be the Awakening Management Department call center. When our protagonist informs them about his awakening, they congratulate him and offer to send a representative to assist him as soon as he gives his address. Actually, the reason our protagonist calls the department is because he only wants to sell the mana stones and nothing else. We skip to the Awakening Management Department. Inside the car, team leader Guangli asks manager Mina about the Awakener from the previous day. She explains the person wasn't the S++ Awakener, making him feel a bit frustrated. Still, she informs him that they have received news about another Awakener. The team leader understands and adds that if the person happens to be an S++ Awakener, they must go all out and offer anything to make him join the elite team. Speaking of the S++ Awakener, our protagonist is busy cleaning up his house. The moment he hears that representatives from the Awakening Management Department have arrived, team leader Guangli is the first to step in after our protagonist tells them to enter. After introducing himself and manager Mina, our protagonist wonders why the lady makes him feel nervous. Suddenly, manager Mina approaches our protagonist. A bit suspicious, she directly asks if our protagonist is the S++ Awakener. Poor team leader Guangli is frozen in shock while watching this. Our protagonist becomes startled. Inwardly, his thoughts reveal his panic as he wonders if she has some kind of detection ability. If that were the case, he simply needs to lie while acting natural. Our protagonist brushes it off, while manager Mina simply observes him, noting, "This is a textbook case of someone lying." Team leader Guangli tries to smack her for being rude, but she ducks, noting she will be more careful next time. Turning to our protagonist, he apologizes for her antics, but our protagonist insists it was fine. Before proceeding, the narrative reveals more information about the Black Towers in the form of a presentation. No one can tell the origin of the Black Towers, but they suddenly appeared and were taller than the tallest skyscrapers. In addition, the Black Towers had some kind of barrier that prevents external forces from getting close. Just as people were wondering what to do about the Black Towers, players suddenly began appearing, and that's how they learned that only players can access the floors inside the tower. Their skills are active inside, but outside they are nothing more than regular humans. In addition, materials from the tower can help the economy. Interestingly enough, players have to constantly climb the tower. If they don't, the tower will issue a global warning. If a floor isn't ascended within 6 months, the Black Tower will automatically begin a countdown. Eventually, it will collapse. Apparently, that is what happened to the city of Mumbai, and the whole country of India was destroyed alongside the Black Tower. Hence, players need to climb the tower, and luckily for Korea, they only have one, while some countries have two or more. Only 0.1% to 0.5% of a country's population can become awakened. Despite this variability and having relatively few players, Korea's tower progress is steady, so players are literally heroes. Without them, no one can explore the Black Tower. And just like that, the presentation ends, throwing in some motivation and encouraging our protagonist to become a hero. After the presentation ends, team leader Guangli requests to ask a few questions as part of verification. Meanwhile, our protagonist finds the whole process unnecessary since he only wants to sell his mana stones. Regardless, when team leader Guangli asks if he is truly an awakened, our protagonist presents the mana stones as proof. The moment our protagonist casually admits reaching the 10th floor, both team leader Guangli and manager Minna exchange looks. Now manager Minna becomes curious, wondering if our protagonist is really the Ace++ rank. With this in mind, she asks if our protagonist has heard about the public announcement that has been trending. Our protagonist gives an honest response, but team leader Guangli insists he shouldn't be nervous. Our protagonist isn't nervous. The poor guy is practically convulsing, wondering if they suspect anything. Regardless, team leader Guangli proceeds by explaining the terms of the contract, adding that the department manages two groups. He starts with the general group. They consist of individuals who want to explore the tower floors on their own, basically freelancers. The second group is the elite group. They have a close relationship with the government and bear much heavier obligations. In return, they receive great benefits. An example of these benefits is protection, since players are still human once they leave the tower. In addition, they receive an annual salary. Meanwhile, the entire time, our protagonist isn't really paying attention. He knows that if they find out he is S++, he will definitely become the center of attention, which he doesn't want. Because of this, he interrupts team leader Guangli mid-sentence, politely. Team leader Guangli is caught off guard when our protagonist tells him that he isn't interested in the elite group. He explains that he is fine in the general group, despite team leader Guangli trying to persuade him with the benefits. Our protagonist casually admits that ascending the tower is dangerous and kind of scary. In other words, he is okay with getting reasonable rewards. Meanwhile, manager Minna observes team leader Guangli's failure to persuade our protagonist, like an annoying salesman who fails to take the hint when a customer isn't interested. She thinks to herself that people already know there will come a time when they reach their limit and can no longer ascend the tower. But having someone admit it so blatantly is something else. Even if our protagonist eventually joins the elite group, he would be nothing but dead weight since he doesn't have the desire to climb the tower. Finally, our protagonist is relieved when team leader Guangli decides to respect his choice, so he suggests our protagonist enter the tower as the last part of verifying that he is awakened. Before entering, he suggests our protagonist use the opportunity to clear a floor, since a player can only enter the tower once a day. Our protagonist immediately realizes it is a test, and reminds them that it usually takes 2 hours. Manager Minna insists he shouldn't worry about them. After all, it's part of their job. Our protagonist decides to enter the tower, telling them to feel free to treat themselves while he is gone. With that, he teleports into the tower. Team leader Guangli sees this and confirms that our protagonist is truly awakened, asking for manager Minna's opinion. Coldly, she states that from what she has observed, she can't tell if our protagonist is talented. However, he is too timid, and that alone is enough to make her believe he will stop at the 11th floor. Team leader Guangli listens as she continues, noting that the 11th floor tests a player's fear. The team leader realizes she is talking about the long-tailed centipede. Although she admits they are not difficult to kill, the mission requires killing hundreds of them. Because of the horrific situation, she believes it is something our protagonist can't handle. This is why she is confident that he wouldn't even step out of the safe zone. Team leader Guangli thinks she might be right and decides to inform the director about another dead end. Meanwhile, inside the tower, our protagonist summons John. As usual, the guy thanks our protagonist for summoning him. The moment our protagonist sees the mission to defeat 100 giant long-tailed centipedes, he immediately feels sick, just as manager Minna predicted. However, John happily decides to handle it, noting it would take at most 5 minutes. However, John is surprised when our protagonist insists he hunts slowly this time. After explaining the situation and the reason he summoned him inside the tower, rather than outside, John Cossack responds with a thumbs up, saying he understands. He grins like an idiot, as if he just discovered the secret to world hunger. However, when John Cusack kills one centipede with ease, our protagonist reminds him to hunt slowly. So John agrees and heads out to complete the mission, but in that instant our protagonist is caught off guard. Multiple centipedes launch at him, and he is unable to react with his escape skill. Thankfully, John Cusack senses this in time. In an instant, he teleports and wipes them out. Seeing this, our boy is grateful, but still insists John should hunt slowly. Unfortunately, the rules of the summon take priority. As a result, our protagonist is shocked because John clears the entire mission within 5 minutes. The tower system, as usual, immediately gives the rewards after the clear. Our protagonist exits with John, while the poor guy apologizes. Meanwhile, back at his place, manager Minna checks the time, thinking that if our protagonist is the ES++ rank, he should be coming out now. Mid-sentence, she freezes, making team leader Guangli wonder what is happening. She stares at the announcement. At the same time, our protagonist exits the tower. Apparently, it seems team leader Guangli isn't awakened, since he doesn't have a system and doesn't understand what is happening. So manager Mina informs him that our protagonist exited the tower at the exact same time the announcement was made. Meanwhile, our protagonist coldly gives John an order. Our protagonist intends to silence them. But knowing John Cusack, both government workers would probably end up with decorative bows on their heads. However, thankfully, it's all just in our protagonist's imagination. Team leader Guangli wonders if our protagonist is fine. In response, he apologizes. He got paranoid for no reason. So, team leader Guangli decides to reiterate his offer. However, before he can speak, our protagonist insists there must be a misunderstanding because there is no way he is the S++ awakener. He labels his exit and the timing of the announcement as mere coincidence. The team leader is a bit speechless hearing this. Still, he tells our protagonist that now that he is awakened, he still needs to sign a contract. However, our protagonist becomes shocked when he sees that the contract is for the elite group. Team leader Guangli notes that he is correct, but adds that this contract is different from the normal elite contract, because this one is an ultra-elite contract. Listing the perks, he explains that our protagonist's annual salary will be 12 billion won. In addition, he will have his own private security team. As if that wasn't enough, he will also be granted immunity. In simple terms, our protagonist will be treated like nobility. However, he isn't showing the slightest excitement after hearing this. Currently, this kind of contract is only granted to the top-ranked player, Yu Kielman. Despite this, our protagonist refuses. He explains that he isn't going to become a player if he isn't given a general contract. In response, team leader Guangli asks why he seems to oppose the idea. Our protagonist mentions that he hates receiving attention. The two observe him closely and come to a unanimous conclusion. They think our protagonist is an extreme introvert. Team leader Guangli decides it's best to head back and not force him, so he agrees to give our protagonist a standard contract. While closing the deal, our protagonist's thoughts explain his choice. He knows anyone watching would be frustrated, but taking the elite group contract comes with massive responsibility. In other words, climbing the tower is no longer an option, it becomes an obligation. Not to mention, players would have to enter unexplored towers, basically venturing into unknown territory. Our protagonist doesn't want that kind of pressure. Not to mention, he doesn't even know if he wants to keep climbing the tower. Later, we are taken to the Awakening Management Department. Inside the director's office, Director Park Kyung-soo wonders if the report he is seeing is true. Team leader Guangli nods. He confirms that our protagonist is the AS++ awakener, but the director doesn't understand. So he explains that our protagonist has a peculiar personality. He adds that he is an ordinary citizen, the kind he rarely encounters. Director Park Kyung-soo seems skeptical, wondering if they perhaps made a mistake. Manager Mina disagrees. She explains that our protagonist exiting the tower perfectly matched the announcement timing. Hearing this, the bald man becomes fired up. He notes that even if our protagonist is an introvert, their main objective still remains securing him. Team leader Guangli agrees and promises to use whatever means necessary to make our protagonist join the elite group. Speaking of our protagonist, the wimp, who doesn't even know how to make an angry face. John Cusack simply apologizes while our protagonist continues acting tough and throwing tantrums. Anyways, we are taken to the 12th floor of the Black Tower. The tower system tasks our protagonist with eliminating ice icicle spear weasels. Summoning John, our protagonist reminds him to hunt slowly this time. John agrees and heads out to complete the mission. Just as our protagonist thinks the guy will finally listen, he suddenly realizes how cold the 12th floor is. Even though he prepared, he didn't expect it to be this cold. Unexpectedly, John notices our protagonist and assumes he is suffering from the cold. Before our protagonist can even explain, John dashes into battle. The result? He wipes out all the weasels in record time. To him, our protagonist could literally die from a simple cold. Our protagonist just stands there, wondering how his plan went wrong. Still, he receives his rewards for clearing the floor at record speed. At the same time, team leader Guangli and manager Mina receive news that our protagonist has just cleared the 12th floor. The moment they return, John tries to jokingly reassure him that he is safe now. He is about to go watch TV when our protagonist unsummons him. To our protagonist, he doesn't deserve any rewards if he can't follow simple instructions. On the 13th floor, the same thing repeats itself. John Cusack carries our protagonist once again, and history repeats itself on the 14th floor. At this point, our protagonist is speechless. He clears the floor with S++ and receives his usual rewards. Later, our protagonist checks his bank account and sees his commission from Mana Stone sales, along with the general player support funds. He does a quick calculation of his current earnings, combined with the Mana Stones he recently acquired from the tower. The total comes to around 7 million won in just 2 weeks. Furthermore, if things go smoothly, he could end up making 1 million won every day, meaning about 30 million won every month. The next day, our protagonist summons John Cusack, who immediately apologizes and expresses gratitude for receiving a 5-star rating despite his recent performance. Anyways, John becomes surprised when our protagonist tells him to do whatever he wants while hunting, because there's no point in staying low anymore, since the Awakening Management Department already knows everything. Not to mention, he could get another perk once he clears the 15th floor with S++. With that, he tells John it's time to enter the tower. The system informs him that he has entered the 15th floor of the Black Tower, and his mission is to eliminate goblin workers. Our protagonist notes inwardly that this is the first time he is seeing humanoid monsters. Even if goblins are weak, they have some level of intelligence, meaning ascending higher floors will become trickier. Anyways, John Cusack, as usual, decides to handle everything. Since goblins are cunning, he advises our protagonist to hide properly this time. Smirking, he explains that he plans to eliminate all of them at once. Our protagonist watches as John activates a stealth skill, and just like that, he begins slicing off goblins' heads with ease. Our protagonist clears the 15th floor, levels up, and receives 1.5 kilograms of Mana Stone along with 5 healing potions. As usual, he receives a platinum badge for achieving an S++ clear speed. Later, our protagonist exits the tower with John. Accessing his inventory, he realizes he has successfully gathered 15 platinum badges. As expected, whenever he gathers 5 platinum badges in succession, he unlocks a perk. The last time, the perk allowed him to copy 1 skill from his summon. Now, our protagonist wonders what he will get this time. In the next chapter, our protagonist receives an energy barrier kit as his perk, which looks more like a wristband. Anyways, the system explains that the energy barrier kit protects him by absorbing a certain level of damage. It disappears after that and only reappears after 5 hours. In addition, the barrier adjusts according to his level, meaning the stronger he gets, the thicker his protection becomes. Our protagonist realizes it's more like body armor, and since it's not a tower-exclusive item, it can work even in the real world. Because of this, our protagonist wonders if he should sell it. But how could he, when there are better rewards ahead? Excitedly, he asks if John can clear the 16th floor with an S++. John shakes his head. Our protagonist is momentarily surprised. This is the first time he's hearing something like this from John. However, before we discover what he plans to do, the scene changes to the Awakening Management Department. Apparently, it has been some time since the US++ rank stopped updating. Manager Mina confirms that it has been 15 days, while team leader Guangli adds that they suspect our protagonist must be stuck on the 15th floor. This makes director Park Kyung-soo frustrated. He wonders why the heavens would bless such talent to such a timid person. However, the team leader insists our protagonist isn't stuck, since the difficulty increases from the 16th floor and suggests they wait. In the next second, he receives a message that our protagonist wants to come to their building and enter the player shop. Hearing this, director Park Kyung-soo begins to piece things together. It turns out that our protagonist has been repeatedly clearing the 15th floor to raise funds. Team leader Guangli recalls that he didn't have any equipment when they visited, which is likely why he hasn't attempted the 16th floor. Now, director Park Hyung-soo realizes he jumped to conclusions, so he tells them that the moment our protagonist enters the building, all items and equipment must be offered at a low price. Anyways, before we proceed, we skip back 15 days ago. Inside the tower, our protagonist orders John to stab him with his knife. John refuses, saying he would rather chop off his own hands, even though our protagonist simply wants to test if the energy barrier is working. He doesn't understand why the poor guy is making such a fuss. Anyways, our protagonist decides to do it himself, leaving John in shock. Seeing this, John Cusack is about to chop off his own arm, but our protagonist insists he stays still. Apparently, he forgot to activate the energy barrier. After healing himself with a potion, John begs him not to pull something like that again. Now, following our protagonist's instructions, John goes to hunt some goblins. While John is busy, our protagonist decides to use this time to master his abilities. With that thought, he activates Shadow Step. In the next second, it feels like he teleports. While using the skill, our protagonist finds his body light and realizes why John wanted him to learn it first. While trying out the skill, he accidentally runs into a goblin. Our protagonist realizes in shock that the goblin was hiding from John. The goblin senses our protagonist's fear and lunges at him. Thankfully, our protagonist remembers to activate the energy barrier this time. He kicks the goblin, sending it flying. John sees the goblin and slices it instantly. Commenting on the kick, he asks if our protagonist happens to play soccer. Then, thinking about our protagonist's safety, John immediately rushes forward. He asks if our protagonist is okay, and without waiting for a reply, begins checking him for injuries, leaving our protagonist feeling awkward. Right after, he starts lecturing him about safety. After repeatedly clearing the 15th floor for 2 weeks, our protagonist accumulates a reasonable amount of mana stones and becomes accustomed to his skills. Now the scene shifts back to the present. Our protagonist calls the Awakening Management Department and feels a bit uneasy as team leader Guangli offers to send someone to pick him up. In the next scene, our protagonist arrives at the department in a limo. Meanwhile, team leader Guangli has been waiting for him. He greets our protagonist and offers to show him inside. Thanks to our protagonist's personality, he can't help but feel a bit anxious. Anyways, the team leader guides him inside, and our protagonist successfully registers. When team leader Guangli asks if he needs any assistance, our protagonist shakes his head, saying he will take his time to look around. Eventually, he enters the player shop. The place is luxurious, and our protagonist wonders why there isn't a single customer. He begins to feel uneasy, thinking the items must be extremely expensive, but decides to first sell his mana stones. Honestly, just look at this guy. Even having a simple conversation feels like a chore. Meanwhile, at the same time, in the director's office, Director Park Hyung-soo asks about the situation. Team leader Guangli explains that our protagonist is browsing, and he made sure no other players would come into the shop by telling them it was closed. As for the prices, he instructed the staff to give our protagonist a 90% discount on anything he buys. Since offering items for free might make him uncomfortable, he might end up not buying anything. The scene changes to our protagonist's place. After an entire day of shopping, he only buys a mace for 2 million won and basilisk leather boots for 3 million won. Our protagonist knows the items should have cost much more and wonders if this is team leader Guangli's doing. Nonetheless, he finds the items helpful, especially the boots, since the energy barrier unifies all defense. With this in mind, he thinks it's finally time to head to the 16th floor. So, the very next day, he summons John and immediately informs him of his plan to attempt the 16th floor. He also explains that it's finally time to use his random summon again. John is surprised upon hearing this. Still, our protagonist initiates the random summon while calling out to every god from different religions. Both men are stunned, and our protagonist feels that something isn't right. In the next moment, part of his ceiling is completely destroyed. Now, our protagonist begins to sweat, wondering what on earth he just summoned. Just as our protagonist was wondering if he had just summoned a monster, John becomes furious, calling the newcomer a moron. The newcomer's welcome gift is a dropkick from John Cusack. Our protagonist watches them and wonders if they perhaps knew each other. After receiving several kicks from John, the big guy claims it only tickles. Turning serious, John thinks this bastard deserves a fancy ribbon on his head. However, that's when our protagonist steps in to defuse things. His ceiling is already broken. He can't afford to have his house wrecked. Still, our protagonist is confused when John mentions there was no need for him to talk to the big guy. He adds that the guy is known for being an idiot, and believes he doesn't even know the principles of summons. Predictably, when John suggests he explain them, the guy struggles to recite anything. Basically, the guy's brain isn't braining, which makes John furious. He notes that this idiot shouldn't have been summoned, leaving our protagonist shocked. Checking the big guy's profile, the system identifies him as a dull barbarian meat shield of the Great Plains tribe. The guy has no name, he is obviously human and a barbarian. Meanwhile, our protagonist feels a bit disappointed that he drew a rare type, which is actually the lowest rank. Now he has to wait a full month before he can draw again. Our protagonist tries getting anything useful from the big guy, but the guy knows nothing. As a result, the system shows him the big guy's last memories, like during his time with John Cusack. Our protagonist's consciousness is dropped into a different location. From the lore, the big guy was a simple-minded barbarian who was intrigued by nature. Aside from his simple nature, the guy's physical abilities are on a completely different level. Eventually, a time came when the big guy couldn't remember his own name. Perhaps he traded his brain for more muscle. Because of this, he was deceived by a false hero. The barbarian was used as a meat shield during the battle with the arch-fiend Hydra. The big guy didn't disappoint. He was able to withstand the Hydra's attacks, and even managed to rip off some of its heads. However, he wasn't aware that his body was being corroded by the Hydra's acidic breath. Eventually, he died, and the people who set him up just laughed at the fool. Seeing this, our protagonist feels sad. Offering his hand to the big guy, he suggests they climb the tower together. Since the big guy doesn't have a name, our protagonist asks what he wants to be called. So our protagonist gives him two options, either Barbar, short for barbarian, or Meatball. The big guy chooses Meatball. Our protagonist promises to take good care of him, asking if Meatball believes him. He nods. Meanwhile, John can't believe our protagonist wants him to work with Meatball as a comrade in the future. However, after some quick calculations, John Cusack happily agrees, noting it wouldn't be bad to have a meat shield. With that said, he suggests they climb the tower. Now our protagonist and his summons are sent to the 16th floor. His mission this time is to eliminate 30 goblin scouts. While walking through the dense forest, John tells our protagonist to be careful and be ready to use his energy armor and shadow step at any time. He warns that this group of goblins uses poison darts, and that they are usually the ones to attack first. Predictably, one goblin chooses our protagonist as his target. Thankfully, John Cusack manages to catch the arrow in time. Now multiple goblins suddenly appear out of nowhere. John immediately tells our protagonist to hide, realizing they've walked into an ambush. Our protagonist takes cover behind a stone, noting there seem to be more than 50 goblins. So he tells Meatball to block all the attacks. The big guy is activated. He lifts himself into the air. The whole goblin army freezes, seeing him come down like some kind of meteor. At that moment, John finally senses something and looks up as the goblins try to flee. Poor guy doesn't even get the chance to react. Meatball crashes down like a meteor, sending all the goblins flying, including John. Our protagonist watches in shock. The big guy's physical abilities are completely off the charts. Even better, the guy moves and hits harder than Truck Kun. Still watching, our protagonist can't believe this guy is actually R rank. His strength alone makes him comparable to John. Perhaps the reason he's labeled lowest is because of his intelligence. Anyways, after the mission, our protagonist orders some KFC. The big guy eats, commenting that the chicken, which he unintentionally mispronounces, is delicious. Still, our protagonist notes the guy was amazing today. As for John, he doesn't miss the chance to land a hit whenever the guy makes a mistake, while also finding the food too spicy, to which the big guy mocks him. Our protagonist realizes these two might never get along, but he's caught off guard when the big guy calls him a good person. Just as it seems they were having a touching moment, John, as usual, kicks the big guy in the face for mispronouncing chicken. As a result, our protagonist reprimands John for interrupting their conversation. The next day, our protagonist enters the 17th floor. As usual, his strength and stats are adjusted to match the current floor. Thinking this time will be different, he's about to tell the guys he'll help. But as if reading his thoughts, John suggests he can help at the 20th floor. For now, he will take point, while the big guy decides to stay and protect our protagonist, leaving him dejected. Anyways, this time our protagonist is tasked with eliminating 30 goblin warriors, or rather, eliminating a goblin army. Our protagonist notes how this is completely different from the walkthrough because there are at least 90 goblin troops. From the walkthrough, he explains the way to clear the floor is by baiting a portion of the goblins into the safety zone. Since the path is narrow, killing them will be easy. He just has to repeat the process until he completes the mission. Knowing this will take a lot of time, he comes up with his own plan. Just like Captain America, he gives the big guy permission to smash. In order to reach the 20th floor as quickly as possible, our protagonist notes he will need to rely on the big guy. Just as things were getting serious, one goblin soldier thought he was the main protagonist. The goblins formed a line, thinking they had this in the bag. However, they were about to be introduced to Meatball, built like a giant and hitting like a truck. And just like that, the goblins were doing aerial acrobatics they never signed up for. Our protagonist expected as much from the big guy. In battle, tactics only matter when both sides are equally matched. And just like that, our protagonist easily cleared the floor and received his usual S++ rewards. Meanwhile, John noticed our protagonist paying more attention to the big guy. The poor guy was left shocked after seeing this. We skip to the 18th floor. This time, our protagonist is tasked with killing goblin assassins. As usual, the big guy charges in like a truck. Surprisingly, the goblins have stealth skills. Now the big guy is left confused since he can't see any goblins. Our protagonist mirrors his expression. Meanwhile, someone bursts into hard belly laughter. It turns out to be John, and this time he believes it's his moment to shine. With that, he charges into battle, activating Shadow Step. Meanwhile, our protagonist watches and realizes this is the result of John's poor performance on the previous floor. It turns out this was his plan to spark competition. Our protagonist also thinks to himself that he needs to keep increasing his perks. And since he is now at level 18, this is the perfect chance to test all his abilities. From the walkthrough, our protagonist learns that the goblin assassin's stealth skill is low. In other words, if he concentrates enough, he will be able to spot their movements. In addition, he doesn't need to be afraid since he mastered using Shadow Step back on the 15th floor. However, just as he is about to hit a goblin from behind, the fool trips. Thankfully, the goblin doesn't know how to dodge, otherwise things might have ended differently. The system immediately registers the kill, but before our protagonist can celebrate, his spidey sense kicks in as he senses a goblin about to attack him from behind. Meanwhile, John is having the time of his life dealing with the goblins. He sees the big guy trying to help, so John insists he stop already since he's only getting in the way. However, this moment of distraction makes him wonder where our protagonist is. Speaking of our protagonist, he manages to stop the goblin's sneak attack by activating his energy armor. But in the next moment, he realizes two goblins are charging at him at the same time. Our protagonist comments that because of the adrenaline rush, the goblins seem to be moving in slow motion. It's simple. Our protagonist is no longer the weakling he once was. Now the system notes his rewards, and as usual, he receives his platinum badge for the S++ clear. Meanwhile, John finally reaches our protagonist and is left in shock. It turns out our protagonist is responsible for getting the last two kills. Both guys are confused as John suddenly breaks down in tears. At the same time, at the Awakening Management Department, Manager Mina announces our protagonist's clearing of the 18th floor. Director Park Kyung-soo becomes excited, and team leader Gwangli notes that the guy is practically unstoppable. When Director Park Kyung-soo talks about revealing our protagonist's identity, both his subordinates disagree and voice how dangerous it would be. The director explains he was joking, so team leader Gwangli suggests they should treat our protagonist far better than any player in the elite team. Later that day, news of our protagonist's S++ streak of clearing the tower is broadcast. Naturally, everyone is wondering about the mysterious player. However, John turns off the news before the report can finish. Our protagonist can tell John has something on his mind and suggests he speak. So John points out the speed at which our protagonist is beginning to realize his talent. Pointing at himself, our protagonist confusedly asks if he's referring to him and insists John shouldn't joke around. However, John remains silent. In his contemplation, he reveals that the shadow step he saw our protagonist use to kill the last goblin is something even he himself can't easily replicate. But that's not even the worst part. Our protagonist is starting to find combat fun and is forgetting that he is a summoner. The danger will naturally increase as they ascend. John asks if our protagonist has forgotten that the main idea of a summoner is not to be brave, but to prioritize safety first. In response, our protagonist assures him that he isn't doing anything dangerous, and that it was only this one time. However, his expression seems to be telling a different story. John thinks that if this continues, our protagonist will undoubtedly cause an accident someday. Seeing John's reaction, the big guy teases him playfully, calling him a moron. In response, he gets a swift kick to the face. Our protagonist watches this and immediately panics. Before the two of them could continue fighting, our protagonist quickly unsummons them both. Now his precious kimchi, the one his mom prepared for him, is completely ruined. The next morning, our protagonist is seen walking up to an apartment complex. It turns out he came to visit his parents. Helping his dad to the table, he asked about his younger brother. His dad explained that he was running an errand. Anyway, the food is ready. Our protagonist sits down with his entire family. During the meal, his parents notice his worried expression and reassure him that they are doing fine and he shouldn't worry. Because of this, our protagonist is about to tell them that he has now become a player. Before he can finish, his dad stops him mid-sentence. The man, ever the comedian, can't imagine his son, who seems so much like him, becoming a player. He even brags about how he sometimes begs his wife to kill cockroaches for him. His wife wonders if that is something he should really be proud of. Switching topics, she asks our protagonist about his job. He doesn't give a proper response. His mom immediately calls him out, saying he is lying. Regardless, she decides to trust him. But she adds that he shouldn't borrow money from loan sharks. This causes our protagonist to reflect and remember John Cusack's handiwork. Speaking of jobs, our protagonist's mom recounts how she got fired. She explains that the customer was unreasonable, insisting she clean up their recycling and food waste too. She adds that the lady had it coming. As usual, our protagonist's dad chimes in that his mother has a tough personality. He notes that our protagonist should have seen how she acted when he tried to ask her out on their first date, compared to his father, who is a beta male. Unfortunately, his genes were dominant. Well, it's safe to say we know who to blame for our protagonist's timid nature. Anyway, our protagonist decides to reveal his awakening later. Before leaving, our protagonist hands his younger brother some money, explaining it was for their parents. Before our protagonist can leave, his brother stops him. At first, our protagonist thinks his brother is looking for a way to thank him for the previous money he gave. Assuming that's the case, our protagonist insists he doesn't need any thanks. But to his shock, his brother simply asks if he forgot about him. The money he gave was meant for their parents. Little brother wants his cut. Our protagonist could only sigh and agree. Later that same day, our protagonist arrives at the Awakening Management Department. Although he admits that he didn't originally plan on coming, after seeing his parents he felt the need to do things properly. Even though team leader Guangli had told him to inform him beforehand if he wanted to come, our protagonist thinks going in directly should be fine. Although he has the energy barrier to protect him, ascending the tower means he needs stronger equipment. In other words, the best thing he should buy is a shield. But to his shock, the shields start at 100 million won. Quickly, he makes an excuse while wondering why the equipment has suddenly become so expensive. He also wonders why a female staff member is attending to him instead of a male like before. After searching for a moment, the female staff happily presents him with a cheaper and more suitable option. Upon equipping it, our protagonist is amazed, especially since it pairs perfectly with his mace. The price of the shield is 40 million won. After making the payment, our protagonist wonders why talking to the female staff felt harder than facing goblins. Just as our protagonist decides to head out, a random man suddenly asks how long he has been a player. Before our protagonist can speak, the man takes the initiative and introduces himself as Choi Hoseok. Our protagonist replies with his own introduction, and they both share which floor they have currently reached. Hearing that our protagonist is only on the 10th floor, Choi Hoseok beams with joy, noting that he is still somewhat of a rookie. He offers to share some advice since he has already reached the 30th floor. Anyway, the guy seems like a chill person and decides to leave first. Our protagonist can't help but envy his bold personality, thinking someone like him must already have a girlfriend. Later that night, our protagonist checks his status window. He is currently at level 19, has 2 summons, and his combat skill is Shadow Step. Seeing this, he feels good and thinks he can challenge the 20th floor. But before that, he needs to make an agreement with John. The moment he summons John, the man feels as if he has tasted something bitter while trying to greet our protagonist. The poor guy collapses, thinking our protagonist must be enjoying himself too much now that he has just bought a shield. When our protagonist mentions that it was meant to protect himself, John notes that those were the exact words his former summoner once said. Regardless, our protagonist is stunned when John begs him not to consider charging in first. He makes our protagonist promise that if the worst happens, he should sacrifice him and the big guy to escape. However, in that moment, he smells something good. John Cusack felt grateful for the food and, at the same time, felt bad for the big guy. Still, he enjoys the dumplings with our protagonist. Mid-bite, John suddenly asks our protagonist if he has a grudge with someone. Seeing his master confused, John explains that he can sense an overwhelming amount of killing intent right outside the door. Our protagonist breaks into a cold sweat and at the same time overhears someone calling from outside. Because of this, he activates his energy armor while instructing John to hide and enter stealth mode. In that instant, the door handle is shot. When our protagonist turns to face the figure, he is left stunned. The intruder happens to be Choi Hoseok from the player shop. He notes how hard it was following him. When our protagonist politely insists he put the gun away, Choi Hoseok becomes furious, asking if he wants to die, and telling our protagonist to hand over his bracelet and open his inventory. Meanwhile, the whole time, our protagonist just wonders what the fool is even thinking. Yeah, because the guy is just a step away from getting a decorative bow on his head. The fool has no idea what's about to happen and even thinks our protagonist is an easy mark. But in the next second, he receives a brutal smash on the head from John. Just like that, he drops like the sack of trash he is. Seeing this, our protagonist is momentarily stunned. Immediately, he praises John for doing a great job. At first, he was scared that John might actually kill the fool. Thankfully, John had managed to read the room and only knocked him out instead. Regardless, our protagonist thinks that Choi Hoseok must be an item broker. He explains that they are people involved in crime who rob players, since they are regular humans once outside the tower. Thankfully, his summoning skill can work outside the tower, otherwise things might not have ended well for him. Our protagonist concludes that he has a cheat ability, while John seems to be looking forward to giving the guy a ribbon. So before John does something else, our protagonist immediately decides to call the people who handle situations like this. Elsewhere, director Park Kyung-soo is shocked that our protagonist visited the player shop again. Team leader Gwang Lee confirms it, adding that our protagonist bought a shield. Based on his pattern of purchases, they suspect our protagonist is a melee-type fighter. Still, the director notes that getting a full set of gear isn't enough. Team leader Gwang Lee agrees and was in the process of telling the director about his plan to arrange a set of armor for our protagonist when his phone rings. Seeing that it's work-related, he asks for permission to answer. However, the next moment, he is left in shock by what he hears on the other side. The man wastes no time and races to our protagonist's place. Running up the staircase, he hopes nothing has happened to our protagonist. Meanwhile, inside our protagonist's place, Choi Hoseok finally comes to his senses as he is about to get dragged out by the guys in blue for home invasion and aggravated robbery. Our protagonist is shocked when Choi Hoseok spins the narrative, insisting he is innocent and that he was the one kidnapped by our protagonist. Because of this, the police suggest that our protagonist follow them to the station. The poor guy is already imagining himself locked up and serving time in jail, but at that moment team leader Gwang Lee finally enters. Choi Hoseok expresses relief upon seeing him, while our protagonist thinks he is doomed. Choi Hoseok is in the process of explaining the situation when he is silenced by a brutal slap from an enraged team leader Gwang Lee. The slap hits hard, leaving him stunned and bleeding. The cops and our protagonist watch in silence as Choi Hoseok's player access is revoked. Choi Hoseok insists there has been some kind of misunderstanding. Finally understanding his situation, Choi Hoseok begins pleading, but team leader Gwang Lee coldly asks if the guy thinks he is a fool and doesn't know anything. It turns out this is not the first time he has pulled something like this. Still furious, team leader Gwang Lee insists he lawyer up, if any lawyer in the city will even agree to take his case. As he is taken away, team leader Gwang Lee reminds the cops that even if he tries to escape by entering the tower, they should wait because he will reappear in the same spot he used when entering. Turning to our protagonist, team leader Gwang Lee asks if he is fine. Our protagonist is slightly panicked after seeing his expression. But to his shock, team leader Gwang Lee expresses an apology and promises he will make sure this never happens again. In his thoughts, he realizes he can no longer wait and must make our protagonist join the elite team. Anyway, the next day our protagonist enters the 19th floor of the tower. Their mission is to defeat 30 goblin shamans. Normally, the shamans are no threat since they can't use powerful magic attacks. They rely on curses and some debuff magic. However, our protagonist has nothing to worry about, because the big guy can actually resist the curses with his battle cry. With the big guy acting like a tank and John Cusack moving in from behind, John suggests they clear the floor as quickly as possible. The guy understands because he remembers what he and John had discussed. With that, both of them charge forward. Meanwhile, our protagonist is in the process of joining them when the tower's system suddenly informs him that the floor has been cleared, leaving him in surprise. It turns out this was John's plan. Apparently, the guys deliberately cleared the floor fast to prevent our protagonist from getting excited and joining the fight. Nonetheless, our protagonist clears the floor with an S++ rank and receives a platinum badge. The following day, we finally reach the 20th floor. Our protagonist explains that the 20th floor is known as the Talent Evaluator and is extremely difficult. John also notes that it is going to be dangerous because this time they are going up against an entire goblin army, meaning soldiers, assassins, shamans, and even a hobgoblin. Because of this, he insists our protagonist just chill in the safe zone while he and the big guy handle everything. The system shows their mission is to kill 100 of any type of goblin, in addition to killing one hobgoblin with a time limit of 10 hours. Our protagonist understands their intentions, and John smiles seeing that our protagonist is staying put. With that, he tells the big guy to draw out the aggro. He charges forward, and our protagonist watches the battle unfold. To John's disbelief, our protagonist suddenly vanishes from the safe zone. Using Shadow Step, he approaches the big guy. Using him as a boost, our protagonist tells him that he will take point. Now, this is exactly what John was scared of. Although he is glad to see the bravery, that doesn't translate to being reckless. The poor assassin is left in utter shock, seeing this character development. Our protagonist explains that ever since childhood, he has always been an introvert. Things got a little worse when he entered elementary school. In middle school, he was a complete loner. When he got to high school, things improved slightly, but he still lived his life like an outcast. Back then, he was afraid of even facing or changing the slightest things. How ironic that the same person is now going against monsters. Unlike forcing himself to engage with people, all he needs to do now is kill the monsters and get his reward. Meanwhile, poor John Cusack is still reeling from the shock. When the goblin troops react by raising their spears, our protagonist responds by using Shadow Step to evade smoothly. Appearing behind a goblin scout, our protagonist instantly deletes it with his mace. He repeats the same process, killing multiple goblin scouts within a few seconds. John watches in stunned amazement. In just a short period of time, our protagonist has mastered Shadow Step to such a high level. However, he immediately warns our protagonist about an attack coming from behind. Our protagonist manages to block most of them with his shield. Thankfully, he has his energy armor, otherwise he would have been cooked. At the worst possible time, he chooses this moment to let his timid nature get the better of him. Our protagonist loses his plot armor at the same time as he is seen running away while asking John and the big guy for help. John immediately instructs the big guy while telling our protagonist to head toward the cliff. While running, our protagonist realizes that he is losing stamina. But in the next moment, he is shocked as the cliff turns out to be a dead end. In the middle of his contemplation, the big guy enters the scene. The guy towers over the goblins, causing chills to run down their spines. One punch immediately sends multiple goblins to meet their creator. Meanwhile, John Cusack has just finished dealing with the other troops. His next targets are the shamans. After taking care of all of them, he does a head count and realizes they have killed a total of 100 goblins, meaning it is time for the final boss, or rather the hobgoblin, to show up. At the same time, our protagonist overhears a roar from a distance. The final boss of the floor has appeared. Seeing this, John immediately leaps into action while instructing the big guy on what to do. Following his order, the big guy charges directly at the hobgoblin. At first, it seems both of them are evenly matched. However, the big guy is a lot stronger. Seeing this, John Cusack comes in for a strike and notes that the guy did good. At least both of them seem to be working together anyway. They finish killing the hobgoblin. And just like that, the system pops up, informing our protagonist that he has cleared the 20th floor. His level has increased. He receives 2 kilograms of mana stones along with 5 healing potions. As usual, John notes that our protagonist did a great job, while our protagonist inwardly notes that his summons just dealt with a boss with ease, as expected from good teamwork. Still, he thanks them for protecting him. As usual, our protagonist clears the floor with an S++ rank and receives a platinum badge. Moments after exiting the tower, Our protagonist sees from his phone that he is becoming an internet sensation. Our protagonist finds this much focus on him very troublesome. Meanwhile, at the Awakening Management Department in the director's office, Manager Mina sees the news and wonders if they should control the press. But the director shakes his head. He explains that doing that will only make people confirm they know our protagonist's identity. So now they shift the discussion to our protagonist's family situation. Team leader Guangli reveals that, according to the investigation, our protagonist's dad, Bong Sukol, is currently in rehabilitation from a hip injury caused by an accident on ice. As for the team leader's suggestion, he has already made arrangements to send him to the best rehab center. The next person is our protagonist's younger brother, Bong Minhyuk, currently a freshman in university. He plans to enlist in the military, so they think providing a scholarship for him would do. The last person on the list is our protagonist's mom, Hong Gumja. Team leader Guangli explains she is a hard worker but recently got fired after a conflict with an abusive customer. Just for the record, team leader Guangli suggests approaching our protagonist's mom first because he believes she has more say in the family than her husband. And just like that, they end the meeting with a plan to support our protagonist's family. Meanwhile, our protagonist tells the guys to hide. It turns out he ordered multiple takeouts, and he doesn't want to scare the delivery guy. Still, he notes that the people are stingy. After ordering so much, he only got dumplings for free. Not to mention there isn't a single coupon. However, it's not like someone like him can make use of it. Anyway, our protagonist gives the green light for them to come out. Our protagonist watches as the big guy even eats the bowl, leading John to furiously call him an idiot. Ignoring them, our protagonist opens the inventory. Since he cleared the previous 5 stages with S++ and received 5 platinum badges, he is now able to unlock a perk. Speaking of which, our protagonist receives a random box as a perk. The system shows the description of the random box, and honestly, it is quite long. Even our protagonist agrees and wonders if he can just skim through the whole thing. Calm now, our protagonist begins explaining. First, the random box can produce 3 items at random and appears at random. As for items, he could get things like mana stones, equipment, and skills. In addition, he can get special power-ups, for instance, a jump ticket that lets him skip a floor. He will gain the experience but no rewards, which is frankly useless. Furthermore, he can win a ticket to try other tower floors in a different country. However, the most important one is the grade confirmation summon ticket. The ticket basically allows him to summon a guaranteed legendary or super rare summon, and he already imagines speedrunning the entire floor if that happens. Since the random box provides 3 draws, it means there is a chance, even though it is slim, to get the grade confirmation summon ticket. With this in mind, our protagonist draws the first prize from the random box. Unfortunately for him, he receives 10 kilograms of mana stones. Feeling a bit dejected, he reassures himself that he can still sell the mana stones for money. Trying to open the random box for the second time, our protagonist receives a skill called Primordial Thunderstaff. Our protagonist decides to check the skill details later. Opening the random box for the last time, our protagonist receives a rune that the system identifies as a summon grade up rune. This causes our protagonist to think he just hit the jackpot, because yeah, the rune allows a summon to increase in grade. So the real question is who to give it to. Turning to his summons, our protagonist sees them fighting over food as usual. Anyway, our protagonist thinks it is best to hand it over to John, considering he already has the big guy, which is enough firepower for now. Furthermore, the system reminds our protagonist that increasing a summon's grade depends on the potential of the summon, and the summon cannot be summoned until the upgrade is complete. With that said, our protagonist decides it is time to check the skill he acquired. The skill, Primordial Thunderstaff, infuses blunt weapons with the power of lightning. It consists of 3 forms and is a growth-type skill. Our protagonist seems impressed, especially since he was looking for a skill and just acquired one. At the same time, knowledge and insight about how to use the skill begin to flow into his brain. As a result, our protagonist immediately gives it a try, but nothing happens. As expected, skills only work inside the tower. If it were possible outside, the world would be in chaos. Moving on, John notices our protagonist swinging his mace and asks about it, to which our protagonist reveals that he just received a skill as a perk. He confirms John's thoughts, adding that it is an attack skill and even a growth type. John is horrified and unintentionally drops his bowl. The big guy immediately takes the bowl and gulps down the entire bowl of food. As a consequence, both of them begin fighting, leaving our protagonist no choice but to unsummon them. The next day, our protagonist sits in his room contemplating. In his thoughts, he knows why John is anxious. Since our protagonist is a summoner, his combat power mostly comes from his summons. In other words, he doesn't necessarily need to leave the safe zone or even join the fight, especially when he can summon them outside the tower. Our protagonist remembers the previous discussion about his last summoner before him. Our protagonist notes that the guy was much stronger than him. Yet he died and his world was destroyed. So John Cusack naturally being anxious about him joining the fight is normal. However, our protagonist doesn't want to pass up this chance, especially now that he has learned a powerful skill. Summoning the big guy and John, our protagonist thinks about absolute obedience, hoping this will be able to convince them. However, it seems John hasn't shaken off his worries from the previous day. Our protagonist can clearly see it is still about the attack skill he received. Still, John insists things are going to be different at the 21st floor, because now they will be facing orcs. Our protagonist is confused when John says he is offering an apology in advance. When our protagonist asks if he plans to kill someone, John Cusack's eyes flash red as he rejects the idea. Instead, he activates the third principle of the summon. Just to remind us, he notes the principle is mainly to protect the summoner. In that instant, the big guy grabs and restrains our protagonist. Seeing this, John furiously smacks the big guy on the head, asking if the guy has forgotten the plan was to hold him inside the tower, not outside. After the banter, John explains apologetically that both of them simply wanted to keep him safe, so the plan was for him to clear the floor while the big guy kept him in check. John stands speechless, seeing our protagonist begging like a child for his parents to let him out, desperately assuring them that he will be careful. Our protagonist even swears he wouldn't charge in like before, and begs for one strike. John feels both apprehensive and reluctant to agree. After much persistence, he agrees, noting our protagonist's safety comes first and he will intervene before the situation becomes dangerous. The next scene takes us inside the tower. While leaving the safe zone, John Cusack explains that orcs, unlike goblins, are strong but stupid. Jokingly, he adds perhaps even smarter than the big guy. Our protagonist, fully geared, notes he will practice the primordial thunderstaff 10 times. John agrees, noting he can even do 100. Yeah, because they have the big guy, which is the perfect training dummy. Hearing both guys insisting it is fine and he should give his all, our protagonist has had enough and threatens to charge in first, making John insist he was simply joking. Still, our protagonist notes the usage is in his head and he will need an orc to test it. Poor John could only agree at this point. Anyway, the tower system tasks them with defeating 30 forest orcs within 3 hours. Seeing this, both John and the big guy charge forward. The big guy leaps forward and easily takes out an orc with a single punch. Meanwhile, John slices through them like butter. Our protagonist realizes that they intend to end and clear the floor quickly. If this happens, he won't get the chance to get a single strike. Seeing an orc suddenly appear behind John, our protagonist smiles, thinking John deliberately left that one for him. With that thought, our protagonist launches himself forward. At the same time, John disappears, assuring our protagonist that he's got his back. Our protagonist dodges the orc's first strike. Next, he leaps into the air, deciding to use the first form of the skill, which is a simple vertical strike. With that, lightning is infused into the mace, and just like that, our protagonist brings down the mace with all his force, using the first form, soul-chasing thunderbolt. Feeling the power coursing through his body, our protagonist can tell the strike isn't weak. After easily defeating an orc, our protagonist immediately grows excited. As a result, he charges at another orc. But in that moment, the big guy kills the orc instead. Now both he and John give our protagonist a stare. Regardless, our protagonist clears the 21st floor and receives his usual rewards. Following this same tactic, our protagonist ascends the upper floors. Basically, he only gets to kill one orc every floor while receiving the same reward from the system. It is finally the day to climb to the 25th floor. Although things have been smooth, our protagonist doesn't like the idea of only getting to kill one monster every floor. However, he decides it is best to build trust for now. At the same time, he remembers the Grade Up rune. After summoning John, our protagonist hands him the rune. At first, John seems confused, but after a close inspection, he is left in disbelief. Still in disbelief, he asks if our protagonist is sure about giving him a Grade Up rune. As a result, the guy is overwhelmed with emotion that our protagonist would give him something so precious. When our protagonist casually asks if he will begin the upgrade now, John answers that he can, but it will be dangerous if done in a rush. As for now, he asks if he could watch some TV. While talking about the cable and scrolling through channels, our protagonist suddenly sees something that makes him freeze. John, confused, asks what he is doing. In response, our protagonist tells him to switch to the previous channel. It turns out to be a news channel, and the broadcast shows his mom. Our protagonist can't understand why his mom is on the news. Before we proceed, we shift to moments before everything went down. Apparently, our protagonist's mom seems to be doing a solo protest against her unfair contract termination. Inwardly, she reveals her frustration. She did her job by setting up a water purifier for a customer. It doesn't make sense for her to also sort the customer's recycling trash. Even more annoying is the fact that the company apologized to the difficult customer and fired her when she did nothing wrong. She can already imagine the executives mocking her petty attempts behind her back. Still, if any bastard dares to do that to her face, she swears she will ram her sign into their faces. In the middle of her protest, she is approached by someone. The older man in glasses calmly introduces himself as an attorney from Park and Kim law firm and appreciates her hard work. Our protagonist's mom's face shows different expressions, first skeptical, then sudden realization, before becoming furious that the company would dare to sue her. However, the lawyer insists she calm down, noting her misunderstanding. Actually, the man came so that she could sue her former company. Apparently, their law firm is the top one in Korea, and they are really interested in her case. They even offer to do it for free. However, our protagonist's mom doesn't share the lawyer's enthusiasm, so he tries explaining how he discovered her case, insisting he isn't a scammer. Our protagonist's mom thinks to herself that although it seems suspicious, right now she has already come this far, meaning it is do or die. With that, the lawyer smiles after our protagonist's mom accepts their offer. Snapping his fingers, the lawyer insists they get to work. Just like that, reporters suddenly appear out of nowhere, as if they had been waiting the entire time. Seeing her confusion, the lawyer tells her to answer any questions and not hold anything back about what the company had done against her. And that is how our protagonist's mom ended up on a news broadcast. Meanwhile, back in the present, our protagonist can't believe what is happening. However, in that moment, he wonders how his mom managed to get a lawyer, not to mention an attorney from Park and Kim. Seeing this, John asks if our protagonist wants him to visit his mom's former company. Our protagonist is momentarily stunned that John managed to understand the entire situation. However, he refuses, noting that his mom already got herself a decent lawyer. Although he doesn't have enough money, he knows he needs to support her somehow. However, his phone ringing interrupts his thoughts. The person calling is his father. Answering the phone, our protagonist's dad asks if his son has seen the news. When he confirms, our protagonist's dad reveals that the lawyer is actually taking the case for free. In addition, he reveals that he is heading back to the hospital. Our protagonist doesn't follow, so he explains that the orthopedic department enrolled him in a rehab program. Even more shocking, the payment was covered. Our protagonist begins to piece things together. Both the hospital and law firm are part of a big conglomerate, so our protagonist wonders about the strange luck. Now he decides to call his little brother, hoping the little bastard will be as lucky as his parents. Our protagonist's little brother answers the phone while filling out some paperwork. His brother explains that he already knows what is happening with their parents. In addition, he tells our protagonist that he now has enough money to buy a laptop and pay for tuition. Because yeah, he too was lucky and received a scholarship after applying this time. Our protagonist listens as his brother mentions that the scholarship he received is the one given by the Awakening Management Department. Hearing this, our protagonist insists he study hard and avoid drinking. After piecing everything together, our protagonist concludes this is the work of the Awakening Management Department. Later that same day, our protagonist calls team leader Guangli and requests somewhere to meet in private, and so the next scene takes us to a quiet restaurant. Our protagonist heads straight to the point, asking why team leader Guangli is helping his family. The man explains it was absolutely necessary. Our protagonist notes to himself that the guy isn't even trying to hide it. Team leader Guangli tells our protagonist he had to do what was necessary to remove any worries that would prevent him from climbing the tower. When our protagonist points out he did it without his knowledge and that he wasn't even part of the elite team, the guy shows a faint smirk. Our protagonist is startled as he slams his hand on the table. Actually, he presented the ultra-elite group contract. With a wide grin, team leader Guangli insists they sign it now to make things official. Our protagonist is left shocked, perhaps wondering how things suddenly shifted.